you, Larry. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it absolutely is. So let's get started. And we're going to start with you, Mike, because we want to talk about what the biggest story of the year was, 2014. We had some pretty momentous things happen. For example, Kathleen Wynne, unbeknown to anybody, became leader of her party and she won a majority election. Maybe that was the biggest story. Or was it the fact that the feds are falling out with the vets right across the country? Or the terrorist attack in Ottawa, where 2 soldiers died, including one of our own? Might that have been the biggest story? Or something else? What do you think, Mike?
You know what, it's funny because when you look back at a year, I mean, sometimes it can be something that's just recently happened and we don't necessarily see the entire breadth of the impact, but maybe 10 years down the road, we'd look back and say, wow, that was the big. And I'm going to go that route because I think you highlighted some very big stories this year, but the biggest one to me is this drop in oil prices, the impact it will have both locally and across the country, some good, some bad. I mean, there's lots of different ways to look at that drop, but because it was such a big drop, and how that will play out over the next year or 2 years could be looked back at as one of a real turning point in how things turn out for Canada and for Ontario even. So.
Sure, because that's dollars and cents in the economy. Ron, what do you think?
And well, it'll affect the economy. It'll affect the federal budget and the whole bit. Yeah. But for me, definitely was Kathleen Wynne's majority win. She. A lot of people doubted that the Liberal Party would even survive here in Ontario, and it did, even more so. The other big story was Hudak's loss. I mean, coming out, I don't know who his advisors were during the campaign, but to come out and say, we're going to cut 100,000 jobs and we're going to create 1 million jobs. What do you do first?
So was it Hudak's loss or Wynne's win? Which?
Well, Wynne's win, and certainly for me, we covered the election at that time, and Andrea's party going all the way over to the right. And abandoning.
I don't think it went all the way over.
Oh, I do. And,
I think that's
and her
quite
bringing down the government and losing, but
yes.
She just went right. And I worked with Andrea at City Hall, and I know how staunch left she was, but it was not the Andrea that I knew.
Well, and Diane Barafato is champing at the bit to get into
Yes.
this. So how far right did Andrea go?
I don't think Andrea went far right. I think that was quite exaggerated.
Ooh.
But I want to go back to the biggest story of the year. And I agree that oil prices is interesting, but I do think the biggest story of the year has been terror at home and terror around the world.
Yeah.
I really think that is the story that has affected most people, both here in Canada and across the world. There's a lot of fear, there's a lot of uncertainty, and it's shaking how our governments are going to structure themselves and react to this. And there's a lot of debate about how. How do you react to this?
Well, and in
so
fact,
I do think that's a big story. And the second one, I think, is the whole, sexual assault, starting with Jian Ghomeshi and then on the Hill, and also other sexual assault that's been coming out on our college campuses, and just inequality. And I think feminism is having a resurgence in the right way, that men are appreciating that they need to be feminists as well, that they truly have to support the women in their lives and the women in the community. So I think those are the two biggest stories that have, I think had widespread impact.
What do you
and
make
it'll
of the
be
fact
interesting.
that Mr. Mulcair didn't want to call the Ottawa attacks terrorism? There seemed to be a bit of a
I think he was
around.
very smart to do that. I think he's not reacting, and I think when people are feeling that they're under threat, we jump to conclusions. And to give you an example, just look at all the reports that happened that day on the Hill. First, it was 1 terrorist, then it was 2, then it was 3, then it was 4. I mean, people were jumping to conclusions without good information. And so I think Tom Mulcair has been very good to say, what's the data? What's the evidence? And let's not throw out our civil liberties. Let's look at how we should respond and use the resources we have, our policing, our current legislation. Are we using it the way we should to protect ourselves?
But then that sort of defeats your most important story, because you said it was terrorist attacks, and yet Thomas Mulcair won't even call it a terrorist attack. So,
well, but your prime minister, but hang on a sec, your prime minister, even yesterday in an interview with Peter Mansbridge, is saying that maybe there was more than one attacker. There may have been others. So he's trying
people
to fan,
helping him. Yes.
But there may have been. He's trying to fan the flames of concern around this.
And if I could just interject again, they are being called terrorist attacks. What I'm saying is everyone was terrorized by these attacks, and I agree that you can use the term that way. People are feeling like the sand has been shifting under their feet, and to me, that's feeling terrorized. Was it a terrorist that was affiliated with a known group? That's the question.
That is the question.
And that has not,
but you
I
look
don't
at
think
that
that's been fully answered.
That Canadian that was on TV who's radicalized from Ottawa, telling everyone to get up and start killing Canadians. I mean, what does this tell you? Like, you talk about fear, that we are living in fear, but we should go out and to our daily lives without that fear. I shouldn't have to feel fear walking outside on the sidewalk. Is
Harper using this to his advantage, Ron?
I think so. Absolutely. People have this notion now, having the Cirillo Nathan's death, murder here. It brought Hamilton together like I have never ever seen. I was so touched by the floral tributes down on James Street North, and the funeral, and looking at his little boy on the cover of Maclean's magazine. It breaks everyone's heart. And we are angry that this happened here in Canada, because we feel that we are immune to these attacks, whatever you want to call them, whether they're terrorists or single deranged, mentally challenged people that can't control, that have to go out and murder. We look at Ottawa and we say, well, how can you prepare for something like that? Do we have to have a police officer with a AK-7 on every single corner, just waiting for someone crazy individual that's going to start shooting?
Well, that's not our Canada. So
no, it isn't our
Canada.
Canadians, and I don't want to go to Ottawa to have to see this.
So because we've got other topics to cover, let's move this along, and we're going to come back to you, Ron. And you actually began this discussion in a way because 2014 was a year of winners and losers, politically speaking. And some politicians are happy to see this year go by. So who are the biggest winners and losers? And you mentioned Wynne and you mentioned Hudak. Would they make your list, or are there other politicians?
There are others. There's Dean Del Mastro of the Conservative Party crying because he was removed from caucus over irregularities in filing his election expenses. I mean, these were really serious charges against him, and him sitting in the House crying. There was, and I know this guy, Fantino, the mayor, Joe Fantino, the mayor of London, Ontario.
Joe Fontana.
Sorry, yes. For $1,700, trying to, are you kidding me? It's just insane. These guys should know better. Should absolutely know better.
All right, so those are two people that you would say.
They would be the ones
that
want to see the
yes.
Mike, what about you? Losers, winners?
Well, I mean, I don't know how you can't count Kathleen Wynne among the biggest winners, and that would have been it certainly was a big news story. I just left it for Ron. Kathleen Wynne, to be able to take a government and continue to carry that government forward with all the ammunition that the other two parties she was up against had, and they failed to use. She would be the big winner, I think. John Tory, I'd like to give a shout out for John Tory, who's taken 19 runs at it and finally got a job. So John Tory, I thought, was a big winner as well. The big losers, one of the more surprising ones to me was Olivia Chow's failure. I really thought Olivia Chow was better on the hustings, would have been better on the hustings,
Yes.
would have been able to garner more support. To come in third and to fail to even crack Doug Ford, who came in late as a replacement for his brother, I thought she was probably one of the biggest political losers of the year.
Diane.
So, biggest losers, starting federally, I would definitely say Julian Fantino and Harper on how they've managed the veterans file. So that is definitely one of the biggest losers. I would say the other big loser, even though he has been up in the polls, he's coming steadily down, he's on a downside, is Justin Trudeau unplugged. I mean, he's just made some terrible comments. And when you ask the average person, you know, what has he done well this year? It's very hard to say, wow, this performance in Parliament was stellar. Let me tell you what I remember about it. So although, you know, he's had popularity over the years, he's certainly not on the upswing in terms of his recent performance.
I don't know that. I think the other party leaders are a little afraid of Mr. Trudeau at the moment.
The
And
latest-
But I
the
don't
latest forum-
think being
The latest forum
afraid.
poll is 43%, has him at majority territory.
Yeah.
But you're right.
He's been sliding.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Larry changed chairs.
And coming back,
I would agree with him. I would agree with him.
I'm just putting
if I
information
could
out
do
there.
a bit provincially,
Diane
I
has the
would
floor.
definitely say the Fords were big losers this year
Yeah.
in terms of, you know, Doug losing the mayoral election and Rob unfortunately having a bad year and obviously now fighting with his cancer. But so the Ford era and that seems to have come abruptly to a halt. And in terms of biggest winners, I mean, I have to give a shout out to Libby Davis. She's exiting, but she has been an amazing female MP, has the respect of MPs across all the parties, was voted one of the hardest workers in Parliament over the years that she's been there. And she has been a real advocate for the missing and murdered Aboriginal women, trying to get this government to do something concrete about a tragedy here in Canada. And again, that speaks to, you know, what gets the attention of this
I forgot,
government.
which party is she with?
Libby Davis, NDP. NDP, yeah. So basically, that would be my list.
Well, nobody mentioned Hamiltonians.
Yes.
And maybe we'll focus on Hamilton in the
Next
next topic.
question. Yeah.
But Chris Charlton certainly
Absolutely.
Yes,
is
and
exiting
Chris Charlton,
on a high note.
who's an
as
NDP as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought she was voted the hardest working MP.
She was actually by some of the Ottawa press folks.
Yeah, she was
Yes.
one of our
but-
former colleagues on the show, The Opinionators.
She
years ago.
cut her political teeth.
Yeah.
I think she
Yes.
ran about 18 times,
Thanks for that.
but
Yes,
ended very
thanks for that
successfully
correction.
as well.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, let's talk about Hamilton then, because Hamilton's had a very interesting year also. We've had a municipal election, and there are some winners and losers